about the palace of Knossos? It was destroyed around the year, at least by the year of 1100 BC, if not slightly earlier, at the hands of the Dorians. Well, the palace was quite substantial, and so the ruins were still quite visible. Evans, remember, found people living amongst the ruins in the 5th century BC, but as we'll see momentarily, in fact, the ruins of the Palace of Knossos were visible up until the 1870s of our era. Now, how did the memory of the Palace of Knossos enter into the minds of the later Greeks? Well, they remembered quite well certain individuals, Minos, the first and second, Idomeneus, but the Palace of Knossos also entered into Greek lore as the Labyrinth. Remember, according to Greek legend, the Labyrinth was a maze built by Daedalus to house the Minotaur. The ruins of Knossos, we know, survived for centuries. And if people walked amongst those ruins, the images of the bulls were ubiquitous everywhere, painted on the walls, parts of pottery that were found, drinking vessels in their shapes, and equally as ubiquitous was the symbol of the double axe. Now, our word labyrinth comes from the Greek word labyrinthos, which means place of the labyrinth or place of the double axe. And the ruins of the palace, and you can see from your ground plan, they look like a maze. And so when people came to the ruins of the palace and walked around this maze-like ruined structure, and they saw all the double axes incised everywhere, they referred to the thing as the place of the double axe, the labyrinth. And of course, they also saw the images of the bulls painted everywhere. And so you can imagine, generation after generation, people who knew nothing of the people who lived in the palace, coming, seeing these bizarre images in this great maze of ruins, and inventing these pseudo-romantic stories of a man, maybe Theseus of Athens, coming and slaying the Minotaur, garbling all sorts of actual historical records together to produce what are now the fanciful romantic legends that we have coming down from the Greeks. The killing of the Minotaur may have been a reflection, however garbled, of an actual Athens-Knossos hostility. So the Palace of Knossos' ruins enter into the Greek mind as the labyrinth, the place of the double axe. But the palace, its ruins, and in fact the Minoans themselves also entered into Greek lore as the island of Atlantis. The earliest we have in the way of literary sources about Atlantis comes from Plato in his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. In the Critias, he describes in great detail the island of Atlantis. Now, much of what Plato said about the island of Atlantis was obviously literary conceit on his part. He made things up to get a philosophic point across that he was trying to make. But there was something in his description of Atlantis that always struck Greeks, the Romans, the people of the Middle Ages and Renaissance, and modern scholars as very, very odd. And that was that Plato said on the island of Atlantis, once a year the princes of Atlantis would go into the sacred grove of Poseidon and there single out a bull for capture. But they could not use any metal weapons in the capture of this bull. They could only use sticks and ropes and nets to capture the bull. That made no sense to anybody until 1925. And in 1925, in the little Greek village of Vaphio on the mainland, these two cups were discovered. And what scholars saw on these cups astounded them and all of a sudden brought into perspective what Plato was talking about and who he was actually talking about.